Good evening, everybody. I'm very happy to see you all here. Thank you for joining us. I am Eugenio Refini from the Department of Italian Studies at NYU, and I'm really happy to be chairing this seminar tonight. We had to move into a fully online event, but this is hopefully a way to get more visitors for this seminar. So let me just begin by saying a few words. I would like to thank Ida Caiazza and Eleonora Carinci for organizing this talk tonight, and also for really coming up with the idea of a joint presentation on the topic Female Agency and Religion in Counter Reformation Italy. For many of us, I would say for all of us, Ida and Eleonora don't really need any introduction, but I will introduce them anyway, very briefly, just for in the sake of for the sake of saving time. Let me briefly do that. So Ida Caiazza is a postdoctoral fellow here at NYU. She's a Marie Curie Global Fellow between NYU and the University of Oslo. Ida received her PhD in Italian philology from the University of Pisa and the University of Helsinki. And before that, she had studied in Pisa at the Scuola Normale Superiore and at the University of Pisa. She is a Marie Curie Global Fellow with us at NYU since the fall of last academic year, and she's working on a very interesting project entitled Women Thinking Love, and focusing on the intersections of textual studies with particular reference to epistolography and the history of emotions. The other speaker tonight is Eleonora Carinci, who comes to us from Oslo. She's also a postdoctoral fellow there. The research project of Eleonora is entitled Rethinking Mary in Early Modern Italy, Men's and Women's Perspectives on the Virgin Mary, 1450-1650. Eleonora studied at the University of Rome La Sapienza, and after studying in Rome, she earned her PhD from the University of Cambridge. They both have had several research affiliations, fellowships, and I won't get into all the details just to save time and get started right away with our program tonight. But of course, feel free to check out their fabulous profiles on their websites if you know more about their research and also about their publications, which are pretty extensive in both cases.
Hey, I'm just listening to the intro of a lecture.
For people in Renaissance studies, many of us are
Can we talk later?
To warmer climates over the next couple of days for the Renaissance
Do you think we might get together tomorrow?
And thank you, to all the others who are not going to San Juan.
Good. I will speak to you later,
tonight,
okay?
And please don't be too jealous when you think about the rest of the week ahead for us. On that note, I would like to simply make room for the presentation. I think Ida will go first, then Eleonora will follow, and we will have Q&As and the discussion after both presentations. Thank you, Ida and Eleonora.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you, Eugenio, and thank you all for being here with us remotely. I am delighted to welcome you to this double lecture together with my colleague and friend Eleonora Carinci, as this is for us a lovely opportunity to join forces as Marie Curie Fellows working on different projects, but with significant intersections. As Eugenio already mentioned, my Marie Curie project is called Women Thinking Love, and Eleonora's is called Rethinking Mary. And we have a joke among us that she works on boring pious women while I work on adulteresses who should be more fun. But you'll see that this is not necessarily the case because she has quite extraordinary nuns, you will see. But jokes aside, I work on how women conceived and lived romantic love, also through literary and philosophical paradigms. And Eleonora is exploring the many ways in which the model of the Virgin Mary worked for the construction of womanhood. To give you a little bit of context, first of all, regarding the question of Counter Reformation female agency we address in our overarching title, our starting point is Virginia Cox's notion of Counter Reformation. Because as Cox has brilliantly shown, Counter Reformation, at least at the beginning, was actually more open to women's writing and more inclined to a positive consideration of women than the central years of the 16th century, which reverses the traditional idea of a golden and open mid-Cinquecento, followed by an abrupt step back after the Council of Trent. Cox explains that before Trent, female literary articulation was actually discouraged by the predominance of themes like eros that could be problematic for respectable women. On the contrary, the Tridentine religious shift generated a literary discourse that was particularly fit for female articulation, precisely because it posed no threat for women's respectability. Even more, features that were thought to be inherently feminine, like modesty and humility, in the post-Tridentine mindset were assessed as universally positive. So a female exemplarity arose that was such not only for women, but also for men. So this ill-famed Counter-Reformation turns out to be not so impervious after all for women's agency and female expression. Having referred to Virginia Cox before getting into the thick of our lectures, I just want to say that she wrote her books, which you can see in the slide about what I have just mentioned, while working at NYU, at our department. And the third book you see here, Innovation in Counter-Reformation, is co-edited by two of her former PhD students at this department, at our department, Anna Wainwright and Shannon McCube. So we are honored to be able to homage these people and this research line right here, where all started and happened. So now, before leaving the floor to Eleonora, I will present two post-Tridentine romantic relationships in which a combination of literature and religion functioned as means of female agency and self-determination. My sources are two love letter exchanges between two couples of lovers, which I analyze through categories that are already known, like gender and intersectionality, but I'm also adding a new and, at least for me, fascinating one, Rosenwein's notion of fantasy of love, which Rosenwein introduced in the field of history of emotions in 2021. According to Rosenwein, the fantasy element is what distinguishes love from other emotional sentimental dimensions. When love is concerned, in fact, what seems to come into play is a narrative of what love is or should be, that a fantasy, a narrative that lovers or people in love have in mind and use to assess, value, and make sense of what happens to them. So dealing with my case studies, I would like to speak of religious fantasies of romantic love, because as we will see, the two women I'm introducing build their own fantasies or narratives of love on their religious background or faith. Hence, love and religion are not two different compartments in their minds, but intertwine and create an organic entity. So to summarize and putting together Rosenwein and Cox, these women, seizing the opportunities provided by the Counter-Reformation culture, used their religious fantasies of romantic love as a means of self-expression and self-determination. So the first case study I want to present today is a story that happened in the Venice ghetto in the years 1618, 1621. And you see here its protagonists, Sara Copio Sulla, Leon Modena, Ansaldo Cebà, and Esther. Sarah was a Jewish married woman. In these years, she was in her 20s. Leon Modena was a rabbi, a relative of Sarah, and her interlocutor in theological and philosophical matters. They both lived in Venice, in the Venice ghetto. Ansaldo Cebà was a 60-year-old Catholic priest, an established poet and intellectual, living and working in Genoa, which at the time was, of course, another state. And Esther is the famous biblical character. Let's start with Esther, whose story, can of course have multiple interpretations, but can certainly be seen as an inspiring narrative of female agency. Esther is a Jew of the diaspora living in Persia and a member of the Persian king's harem. Cleverly using her charms, she becomes the king's favorite or queen, depending on the versions and interpretations, replacing one of the previous one, Vashti. As time goes by, though, the king grows bored of her and stops requiring her company. After a while, Esther is informed by her uncle Mordecai that a pogrom is being planned against the Jews. At this point, to save her people, Esther takes action, pushing the boundaries of the passivity that was expected of women. In fact, according to the rules, the women of the harem could meet the king only if summoned by him. For a woman who tried to reach out to him on her own initiative, the penalty was death. Besides, in that moment, Esther was no longer the king's favorite. Nevertheless, risking her life, she reaches out to the king and manages to win back his favors. Using this renewed influence, she convinces him to stop the pogrom. So she breaks the rules to intervene in a large-scale event, invading the male realms of history and politics, overcoming the boundaries of female seclusion in the private sphere. In a different era and context, Sarah Copio, inspired by Esther, acted in a very similar way. First of all, I should mention that Sarah had strong intellectual ambitions. Here you can see some recent books and conferences about her. She's becoming quite popular these days, deservedly. Sarah hosted a salon where she would engage in literary, philosophical, and theological disputes with both Jewish and Catholic interlocutors. Had a passion for writing and wanted to become a poet. These were male realms and could be quite dangerous for respectable women who were in fact expected to be silent and obedient, to live enclosed in their private and domestic space, not to speak their mind, certainly not in a salon in front of a male audience. Doing such things for a respectable woman meant putting her reputation, her personal and her family social survival at risk, even more so if her family belonged to a discriminated minority like the Jewish one. Sarah, pursuing her intellectual ambitions, ran this risk, but what is more, she did so very consciously, with I would say, with a revolutionary attitude, which we can grasp from her own words. This text here is her dedication of her only published book, the famous Manifesto, to her late father, where she says, we can read briefly together. To you, did I want to present this little gift? Of course, the little gift is the published book, my most devoted parent, who reside midst living spirits and will reside there for eternity. This means that the father is dead. I did so to increase your joy at seeing, perhaps, the little renown that accrues to my name. For this reason, I think that having brought a woman into the world will be no less dear to you for the conservation of your name that having brought a man into it, as you so fervently hoped would happen in this life. Enjoy for now, then, this little disbursement of immense affection that fills your beloved daughter. For if I am allowed to hope for health and life, as I have been granted some fertility in offsprings or creations of my intellect, my name, no less than yours, will, lively expressed, live on in them. This statement conveys a revolutionary woman's claims on male prerogatives, because Sarah, stepping into the public sphere of printed books, claims for herself the role of the male heir of her own family, a role that she wants to perform not through reproduction, but through her intellectual endeavors. Moreover, in spite of being a married woman, Sarah refuses to give up her individual and familial identity, continuing to identify with her original family as a copia, not as a sulam. And regarding her reproductive possibilities, she says that she wants to produce offspring, but through her brain, not through her womb, offspring that will perpetuate the copia, not the sulam name. In other words, showing such a strong individual identity, she's practically refusing to engage herself in the roles of wife and mother as patriarchy required of women. Going back to our intertwining of characters, in 1615, Ansaldo Cebà publishes a chivalric poem in Italian about the story of Esther. Sarah, of course, already knew the story, because the book of Esther is read every year in its entirety in the Jewish festival of Purim. But reading Ansaldo's poem, she gets very excited about this established poet crafting a Jewish character she identified with. And Sarah hopes that Ansaldo might mentor her in becoming a poet and achieving the fame she aspires to. So, as a powerless Esther had done with the mighty king, an obscure Sarah dares to reach out to a famous Ansaldo, writing a letter to him. Now, the Venice ghetto is not the harem of Persia, and there's no death penalty for trying to reach out to anyone. But nevertheless, it is indeed a challenge on Sarah's end, because overcoming generational, national, religious borders, she challenges the gender norm of the time that forbid female action prescribing female passivity and pushes the double set of walls that enclose her, being a woman and a Jew, the walls of the ghetto and those of the domestic space. Ansaldo, flattered by her admiration, replies and accepts to become her mentor. They go on writing to each other for 4 years, and with time, their epistolary exchange grows into a love correspondence. Sarah's husband, Yaakov, was aware of this correspondence, and so were their friends, the regulars of Sarah's salon. So that of Sarah and Ansaldo was not a secret relationship. In fact, it was not technically an adultery, as they never met in person, not even once. But in their letters, they use the language of romantic love, even that of physical desire. It's a literary game, of course, but they appear to be deeply involved in it. They use interesting formulations, such as "make love to your soul," or "if only I were younger and I could come to Venice, you would feel the effects," or "don't put makeup on your face, I don't like a woman who does," or, this is Sarah, "every night I sleep with your books in my bed under my pillow." Perhaps in this couple of platonic lovers, Sarah is more vulnerable than Ansaldo. She's much younger, she's struggling to become someone, and being a woman and a Jew, she belongs to 2 discriminated groups at the same time. Furthermore, she adores this older, famous, established man who has accepted to take her by the hand and guide her to see her dreams of fame come true. I think that there is a clear power imbalance between the 2 of them. And Ansaldo tries to take advantage of this. He conceives a plan. He will first convert Sarah to Christianity, and then he will use her as a Trojan horse to convert the whole Jewish community of Venice. Of course, he's a Catholic believer, so he's probably not lying when he claims that he wants to convert Sarah because he cares about her and wants to save her soul from eternal damnation. But at the same time, converting misbelievers at the time was a means of achieving honor and public recognition. So it's quite likely that he was driven by these motivations too. And what I find most interesting is the subtle, manipulative way he uses to convert Sarah. Among other things, he uses her identification with Esther. As a Catholic believer, Cebà understands the whole Jewish Bible, Old Testament for Catholics, as an announcement of the advent of Christ, and understands Esther too as one of the many Jewish figures who prepare Christianity. And discussing Esther with Sarah, Ansaldo pushes, of course, the Christian interpretation of the biblical heroine, urging Sarah to model herself on the real Christian Esther, real for him, of course. Now, Ansaldo's and Sarah's correspondence while still in progress, is read in Sarah's salon. Among the regulars of the salon, there is Rabbi Leon Modena, a fascinating Jewish intellectual and a promoter of interreligious dialogue between Jews and Catholics. But of course, Modena was a Jew and a rabbi, so we can only imagine his bewilderment when he read how Cheba tried to push Sarah toward the Christian Esther. As a response to all this, Modena writes a tragedy called Esther, where he proposes his own interpretation of the character. He writes the play in Italian, whereas most of his works are in Hebrew, stuffing it with references to the Italian theatrical tradition. And Ansaldo himself was a playwright. Moreover, dedicating the tragedy to Sarah, he refers to Ansaldo's poem and to his correspondence with Sarah. So it's clear, I think, that he wants to intentionally barge into Sarah's and Ansaldo's dangerous liaison. As Cheba had tried to manipulate Sarah through Esther, I think that Modena does nothing less. In his tragedy, Modena introduces two main female characters, Esther, of course, but also Vashti, the previous queen, eventually outclassed by Esther. Modena depicts Vashti and Esther as two opposite models of womanhood. Vashti is a rebel. She even pronounces a monologue against patriarchy, denouncing the discrimination perpetrated against women. Of course, such an attitude will lead her to absolute defeat and death. Esther, instead, is a submissive woman whose agency in Modena's retelling is practically non-existent, as she does no more than obeying her uncle Mordecai's instructions, being a pawn in his hands. Thanks to this submissive attitude, she survives, and Mordecai can use her to save the Jews. Now, if we overlap the quadrilateral Esther, Vashti, Mordecai, the king, to the triangle Sarah, Leone, Ansaldo, the rabbi's aim, Modena's aim, appears very clear. Both the king and Ansaldo are a threat to the survival of the Jews. Leone identifies with Mordecai, the wise male Jew who works behind the scenes to save his people, and Sarah can choose to be either Vashti or Esther. If she goes on in her rebellion like Vashti, she will be destroyed. If she gives up and starts being a pawn in the rabbi's hands, there will be a happy end for the Jews. So to summarize and conclude this first case study, we have seen that at the beginning of the story, Sarah sets very brave, if not revolutionary, life goals, like achieving fame to perpetuate her father's name, modeling herself after a heroic and proactive Esther. Then she gets trapped in two men's schemes, men who try to control her Esther-based self-narrative to achieve their self-centered objectives. But what does Sarah respond? Regarding Ansaldo's manipulation, what she does is resisting, as she never converts to Christianity and never adopts the Christian Esther model. We can easily imagine that resisting is not non-painful for her, because to stay true to herself, she has to let down her admired mentor, the great intellectual she had been so excited about exchanging ideas with and platonically falling in love with. Regarding Modena's manipulation, she never becomes the rabbi's pawn against Cheba, never becomes the Esther who gives up her agency to be Mordecai's instrument. Even after Modena publicly warns her against Cheba, Sarah does not stop her correspondence with her mentor. On the contrary, she goes on for another 2 years, which doesn't mean, as we have seen, that she lets Ansaldo brainwash her. She finds her own way to handle Ansaldo, with no need of Modena's guide. She acts like Esther as a positive agent for the people, as a champion of the Jews, but using her own mind, not Modena's one. And now, our second story, that of Emilia Fiorentina. Emilia Fiorentina clearly being a pseudonym, probably concealing a Florentine gentlewoman precisely from Fiesole. We know about her through Bernardino Lattanzi, a knight of Santo Stefano from a noble family of Orvieto. Here's their coat of arms. Bernardino had a decade-long spiritual love relationship and a correspondence with this mysterious gentlewoman. Being she married to another man, they kept the relationship secret, even though it was only spiritual. Apart from writing to each other, they would sometimes, not very often, meet and talk. When he was far from Florence, they would just think of each other, sometimes interrupting the correspondence for months. And that was it. They never reached beyond the boundaries of honesty and decency, to use Emilia's words. Eventually, Bernardino moved back to Orvieto for good, got married, and started a family with another woman. And both the relationship and the correspondence with Emilia came to an end. Afterwards, he published Emilia's letters, as he writes in the Dedicacy, to provide female readers with a bright example of a woman who loves within the boundaries of honesty, that is to say, who does not commit adultery in a physical way. So Emilia was a married woman and also a fervent Catholic believer. Marriage after the Council of Trent changed very much in Roman Catholic contexts. Before Trent, it was usually considered nothing more than a contract between families. And besides, according to the common literary imaginary of the time, romantic love could not exist within marriage. On the contrary, it could be found only outside wedlock, where there are no obligations, only free choices. But at Trent, the Roman Catholic Church stated and stressed very much that marriage is a sacrament, a spiritual entity. So it's something much bigger and more complex than a contract between families. The sacrament of marriage becomes a path towards spiritual perfection and sanctification. Love between husband and wife becomes an image of the love between Christ and his church. Post-Tridentine future spouses were supposed to marry based on free choice and mutual consent, and to choose the partner based on spiritual affinity, not on patrimony or beauty as used before. For Catholic believers at the end of the 16th century, marriage was an essential spiritual path, a way to experience Christ on earth. We will see that Emilia not only shares this view, but she conceives love through the lenses of sacramental marriage. In her letters, though, she seldom mentions her husband. When she does, she refers to him in a very respectful way as the man she must be faithful to. So she takes the marital vows very seriously, but seems to have nothing more than respect for her husband. And there's no trace of an affective or spiritual relationship between the two of them. We don't know why. We can only guess that perhaps Emilia's husband was not interested in the spiritual side of marriage, or didn't share Emilia's faith, or they had tried and failed. We don't know. Anyway, being in this respectful but not affective nor spiritual marriage, after a while, Emilia falls in love with Bernardino, who is a young, handsome, brilliant soldier with a passion for literature. The lovers, having very different ideas of what marriage and love should and shouldn't be, engage in a very interesting emotional negotiation based on a very peculiar combination of literature and religion. According to Bernardino, love and marriage have nothing to do with religion or spirituality. He would like to live his relationship with Emilia based on two things: on an earthly and mostly literary elective affinity, and on eros, the desire, the physical side of love. Emilia accepts the part of the elective affinity, following his literary idea of it. For example, she accepts to read love literature together and to write together poems about their love as ways to develop their sentiment in everyday life, which is very common among educated lovers of the time we know about. Another thing that she does accept is the exchange of emotionally charged objects, which is another pillar of Renaissance romantic love. Objects, also from an anthropological point of view, are fundamental in the economy of romantic relationships. As Roland Barthes, for instance, among others, puts it, they function as holy relics of the body of the beloved, as metonymies of the beloved, and as such, they are able to elicit strong emotional reactions. While this mechanism per se is kind of universal, the cultural context determines which objects are particularly emotionally charged. In our culture, for instance, rings or Valentine cards have a special meaning. Renaissance culture instead attributed a special emotional value to the objects featured in the story of Laura and Petra. Portraits, of course, but also globes or hairlocks. So, according to Bernardino's literary idea of elective affinity, our lovers exchange their portraits, for instance, and pay a great deal of emotional attention to them. But then Emilia, drawing water to her spiritual meal, tries to add a religious and even devotional side to all these mechanisms. For instance, she comes up with a totally new emotional object, unprecedented in Renaissance love correspondence, the rosary. She possesses many rosaries, but one of them is particularly dear to her. Giving it up, she sends it as a gift to Bernardino, suggesting that he uses it to pray while thinking of her. And she will, on her side, have sweet thoughts of him using her rosary, which is quite a creative way of shaping a daily practice of love through devotion, I think. But Emilia doesn't stop here. The rosary thing is just for ordinary liturgical time, when there are no religious celebrations. For special times, such as Lent, Emilia sets a very detailed schedule that should pause love while the liturgical year is focusing on Christ's passion, for instance, and resume love after Christ's resurrection. This schedule resonates with St. Paul's and St. Jerome's rules for sacramental spouses, who are advised to alternate time for prayer and time for marital love. So it seems easy to conclude that Emilia is trying to model this relationship on the sacramental marriage that perhaps she regretted not to have with her legitimate husband. As for Eros, the other cornerstone of Bernardino's idea of love, quite predictably, Emilia does not agree at all with Bernardino about it. She claims not to feel any kind of physical desire for him, which is precisely, she says, the proof that what she feels for him is true love. As in her opinion, love and lust are incompatible. They are a contradiction in terms. Consequently, the fact that Bernardino has sexual desire for her proves that he does not feel true love for her. This, again, resonates with Trent's idea of sex within the sacramental marriage, as shown, for instance, by these passages from St. Jerome. He who too ardently loves his own wife is an adulterer. It is disgraceful to love one's own wife too much. A wise man ought to love his wife with judgment, not with passion. Let a man govern his voluptuous impulses and not rush headlong into intercourse. There is nothing worse than to love a wife as if she were an adulteress. So here, the idea of adultery is not connected to passion outside wedlock, but to excessive passion within wedlock. So, for Emilia, the problem lies beyond the fact that Bernardino is not her legitimate husband. The problem is that he is incapable of judgment, of governing his voluptuous impulses, which excludes the graceful, to use Jerome's word, calm, heavenly love she seems eager to experience. Now, Bernardino tries to change her mind in many ways, including emotionally blackmailing her and making her fear that he might force himself upon her. Eventually, Bernardino, does an irreversible thing. While Emilia is ill in bed, he seduces her servant, but spreads the rumor that he's being let in the mistress's chambers, not in the servants, just as happens in the story of Dalinda, Ginevra, and Polineso in the Orlando Furioso. When Emilia is cured, the servant herself, fearing to have contracted syphilis, reveals what happened to Emilia. Skipping now the emotional conflagration resulting from all this, what's important here is that thanks to this episode, Emilia realizes beyond any reasonable doubt that Bernardino has no love for her, but only lust for her or for any other woman. At this point, she can't help caring about him, but definitely stops fantasizing about living a surrogate sacramental marriage with him. But this is not the end of the story. As I said, eventually Bernardino gets married and starts a family in Orvieto. The process of finding a suitable candidate and of making all the necessary arrangements like the dowry, the residency of the new family, and so on, is long and complex, and Emilia and Bernardino discuss it in their letters. Well, now it goes without saying they have incompatible perspectives on this too. Bernardino has indeed old-fashioned Tridentine ideas on marriage, conceiving it as a contract between families and nothing more. So he proposes a sort of triangle. While being formally faithful to his future wife, deep down in his soul, he will remain bounded to his true love, Emilia, which is exactly what Emilia has been doing for years, splitting herself between husband and lover. So on paper, it should make perfect sense, even balance the situation a little bit. But Emilia refuses this arrangement because she doesn't want to steal the joys of sacramental marriage from Bernardino's future wife. So she steps aside, encouraging him to acknowledge his future wife's position, not only as the lady of the household, but also as his spiritual companion. Now, one last thing before moving on to the Virgin Mary, the fight between Emilia and Bernardino over female and male literary models they propose for each other and to each other. Bernardino proposes that Emilia follows in the footsteps of Ovid's Heroides and Boccaccio's Fiammetta. In his opinion, they are positive examples of women in love, as they value love above anything else and are prepared to do whatever it takes to keep their beloveds by their side. Emilia, instead, thinks that these women are not positive examples at all, as Dante would have probably put it, they subjugate reason to desire. They become sinners, set wrong priorities, the flesh over the soul. And so they deserve both earthly suffering and eternal damnation. After condemning the Heroides and Fiammetta, Emilia establishes for herself a literary model of her own choice, Laura, specifically in her role of preventing Petrarch from sinning and thus granting his salvation. So it's not the beautiful and silent muse of the immortal poet, but someone who acts according to a superior godly truth, also achieving her objectives. Then Emilia proposes male models to Bernardino, both positive and negative ones. The negative one is Bireno, the protagonist of a minor episode of the Orlando Furioso, in which an irrepressible woman, Olympia, is betrayed and abandoned in a totally undeserved way by a man, Bireno, who has no reason whatsoever to betray her, but does so because of his lust, because he becomes infatuated in a carnal way with another woman who is also betrothed to another man. The positive one, whom of course Bernardino fails to emulate, is Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, apart from being a great general and leader, is also a paradigm of continence and magnanimity. In particular, Emilia refers to an anecdote in which Alexander could have taken advantage of his female prisoners, but heroically refrained from doing so. So to conclude, Emilia seems to be quite an independent thinker and Catholic believer. Believing in the essence of sacramental marriage, she wants the real thing, not the appearance of it offered by her unavailable husband. So she takes action to have it with a man of her choice outside wedlock. She applies sacramental marriage to an irregular relationship, and in doing so, she wrests it from the control of the institution that claimed ownership on it, the church. Through moralized male and female literary models of her choice, she takes on the role of Bernardino's moral guide, fashioning herself as a saint, heroic woman who saves her beloved as well as herself from damnation. At the same time, granting another woman the blessing of sacramental marriage she had to give up. So she is the one who leads the real game, the game of damnation and salvation, determining the destiny of all the players, herself, Bernardino, and even his future wife. So it's all. But what would the Virgin Mary think of this? And would she approve? So now I leave the floor to Eleonora, and thank you.
So hello everyone. I'm speaking.
Yes.
So I would like to thank Ida and Eugenio for giving me the opportunity to present my research here at NYU. And it is a great pleasure and honor to be here. And thank you for being there online, unfortunately, but here we are. My Marie Curie project Here we are. So, my Marie Curie project aims to study and catalog the enormous amount of vernacular literature on the Virgin Mary written and published by men and women in Italy between about 1450 and 1650. The central question I started from concerned the ways in which the Virgin Mary was represented in Marian literature by men and women between 15th and 17th centuries. How the image of the Virgin has changed over time and why. How literary representations, together with artistic ones, of the Virgin helped to construct women's identity and were related to the contemporary discourse on women. How women, in particular women writers, both secular and religious, the main recipient of much devotional literature, interpreted the figure of the Virgin and confront themselves with it. And finally, if and how these representations and interpretations differed from those proposed in similar contemporary literature written by male authors. So today I will focus in particular on two authors who wrote about the Virgin after the Council of Trent, comparing their writings with contemporary Marian tradition and literature. I will consider the issue through the lens of the connections and mutual influences between the representation of the Virgin and the discourse on women, which in the period under consideration was in the center of numerous debates. The Imitatio Mariae also saw an evolution over time, and while offering a model of female holiness, it did not only concern women, but Christians in general. What I would like to reflect on, however, concern the characteristics of the Virgin related to the representation of the feminine and the discourse about women. After all, Mary was the first and foremost a woman, probably the best known and most important woman in Western culture, the most represented and archetypical female image. Marina Warner, in an important study, Alone of Oral Sex, the Myth and the Cult of the Virgin Mary, emphasizes Mary's uniqueness compared to any other earthly woman, and the fact that despite this, some of her characteristics have shaped the stereotypical imagery of the feminine. However, Warner does not focus on the point of view of women. Before presenting the perspective of Lucrezia Marinella and Arcangela Tarabotti, I think it is useful to give you some context about the connection of Mary with women during the Renaissance. Some women, indeed, since the Middle Ages, have come to terms with the figure of Mary, not only as an object of devotion, but also as an authority. These were mostly saints and visionaries, who were inspired by and relied on Mary to legitimize their own voices, to assume the right to read and interpret the Holy Scriptures, to have their say on political issues through a sort of investiture by the Virgin, and in some cases to teach and preach, a possibility traditionally denied to women, according to Pauline dictates. On the other hand, we find writers who were attentive to the role of women in the world and their potential, who in their writings approached the figure of the Virgin as a powerful and authoritative woman, able to dignify the female sex. For example, at the beginning of the 15th century, Christine de Pizan welcomes the Virgin and other saints in her Livre de la Cité des Dames, an allegorical city built by women and for women in opposition to the misogynistic discourse, attributing to the Virgin the title of Queen of Women and inviting her to inhabit that ideal city. For Christine, the Virgin represents, I quote, a defense, protection, and guard against all assaults of enemies and of the world. And by honoring her, men must not only refrain from slandering women, but hold them in great respect. So for Christine, the Virgin was important to defend the female sex. Half a century later, Antonio Cornazzano wrote A Life of the Virgin in octaves. The work was first printed in 1471, but had a considerable circulation in both print and manuscript form in the following decades. Antonio Cornazzano was at the court of Milan, and the work was dedicated to the daughter of the Duke of Francesco I Sforza, Ippolita Maria, who in 1465 married Alfonso of Aragon, Duke of Calabria, and heir to the throne of the Kingdom of Naples. In the prologue, Cornazzano makes a clear association between Mary and the dedicative. I sent my heart to the Virgin Mary, and I told myself that one could not give better company to such a honest and beautiful woman, Ippolita Maria. Virgin is this one, and Virgin was that one. The one is queen in heaven, the other on earth. Therefore, for her sake, we write about her. Perhaps in this endless and ferocious war, both of them will help me not making errors. The dedicatee and the Virgin are two equally the poet's muses, and to some extent interchangeable in helping him to avoid errors in writing his poem. Cornazzano, moreover, emphasizes Mary's wisdom and habit of study, which once again mirrors the dedicatee, who had received a good humanistic education as a woman destined to become a queen. She, the Virgin, especially enjoyed reading. In addition to the Hebrew writing, she could understand the language of later Greeks and Arabic and the Aramaic language. She knew, like alphabet, all words and files of previous kingdoms and their history. At this chronological height, therefore, the Virgin Mary, as Queen of Heaven, could safely be linked to a powerful woman on earth, becoming a model for a learned woman ruler. In the first half of the 16th century, as a figure capable of warranting honor to her own sex, in some cases the Virgin becomes somewhat comparable to the exemplary women, often used to rhetorically demonstrate their superiority of women over men within the querelle des femmes. This is, for instance, the case of Enric Cornelius Agrippa's treatise La nobiltà ed eccellenza delle donne, the nobility and excellence of women, written at the beginning of the 16th century in Latin and printed in the vernacular in 1549, in which the author wants to demonstrate the excellence and superiority of the female sex. And again, he used the Virgin Mary. The noblest gender is the one which is better and nobler than the best of the other gender. In the feminine generation, the best one is the Virgin Mary. In the masculine one, no one was born better than John the Baptist. And no Catholic ignores how much better than him is the Saint Virgin, who is overall the choirs of the angels. In the vast production of pro-women literature of the period, Agrippa's remains, however, a rather isolated case. The Virgin is very soon ousted from the debate on women, perhaps also because to avoid problem with the reformed idea of Mary. Sometimes she was mentioned as anti-Eve, but she rarely appears in the literature relating to the querelle. Baldassar Castiglione knows well this idea. Expresses well this idea in Book 3 of the Courtier, concerning the formation of the cowardly woman, where the main issues related to the querelle des femmes are summarized. Giuliano de' Medici states, quote, "Don't you know that the transgression you mentioned was repaid by a woman who won for us so much more than the other had lost? But I do not wish to tell you now how inferior are all other human creatures to Our Lady, since this will be to confuse divine things with these foolish discussions of ours." The Virgin then, already in 1528, when the Cortegiano came out, is out of the picture of the querelle des femmes for being a divine thing. She still appoints and is a valid example of an exceptional woman, but according to Castiglione, it would seem better not to mix the two levels. After the Council of Trent, there was an explosion of printed vernacular books on Marian subjects in prose and verse. Lives, rosaries, sermons, miracles, poems, mainly written by male authors belonging to religious orders and often addressed to women, were printed and disseminated. And this is just to give you an idea of the amount, just there even more. In this period, the idea of the Virgin, Queen of Heaven, Mother of God, and divine creature, incomparable to any other woman on earth, was being reaffirmed and exalted, in opposition to the idea of the Reformation, which considered Mary an important but exquisitely human figure. At the same time, however, while the spread of conduct literature for women also increased, in popular devotional and in conduct literature addressed to a female audience, the Virgin was often proposed as a model of humble and submissive woman, an obedient, just, pious, and silent mother and wife, and an ideal model of conduct for nuns, wives, mothers, and widows. For instance, in the Specchio di Virtù, a handbook for women's conduct, we read, Every woman and maiden should spend their life to preserve the beautiful gift of chastity and to have the protection of the Mother of Christ, advocate of all virgins, whose life is an example of living, not only for virgins and married women, but also for widows, because she was to virgin the most modest virgin, to married women the most chaste wife, and to widows the most chaste widow. But also in devotional text about the Virgin, we find similar concepts, like in the Meditazioni devotissime sopra la vita della Vergine by the Jesuit Luca Pinelli, printed in 1599, where we read, from the age of 3 until the age of 14, Mary was with the virgins in the Temple of Jerusalem, where she taught how both virgins and religious are to be led, each in her own state. Afterwards, until she was about 45 years old, she was mistress of married women and mothers of families. In the rest of her life, which according to the common opinion was until she was 63 years old, she was an example and mistress to the widows and poor. And similarly, in a book of the Imitation of Mary by the Spanish Jesuit Francisco Arias, translated into Italian in 1599 again, the Virgin is a model of obedience and chastity. Following her example, women have to obey their husbands, and all women of whatever state, but especially virgins and continents, should remain enclosed and shut up in their houses, and not leave them without true necessity or for some honorable purpose to work of charity. So this is more or less the situation of the discourse on the Virgin when proposed as a role model for women in post-Tridentine Italy. In the same years, however, a number of women writers, for the reason well explained by Virginia Cox that Ida was mentioning, we just mentioned, and were writing and printing works on Marian subjects. These women, the main recipients of the above-mentioned book, in different ways and often with different intentions, made an attempt, without departing from tradition and indeed making use of it, to scratch the surface of the contemporary image concerning women's relationship with the Virgin Mary, in order to construct and nurture a new model of womanhood in line with their aspirations, at a time when many Italian women had fully entered the cultural system and experienced even great opportunities after Trent, when devotional literature was welcome and was considered suitable and decorous for women. I will consider today the case of two women active in Venice in the first half of the 17th century, both involved in different ways in the contemporary polemics about women, and who expressed their opinion about the Virgin Mary. Lucrezia Marinella, it's well known, was the most prolific writer of the first half of the 17th century. She was highly appreciated by her contemporaries. She's the author of spiritual poetry, hagiographies in prose and verse, an epic poem, allegorical text, but she's mainly known for her pro-women treatise, La nobiltà e l'eccellenza delle donne, written to respond to the misogynistic treatise by Giuseppe Passi, I Donneschi Difetti, printed for the first time in 1599. In her work, she deconstructs the misogynistic topoi of the time and participates in the contemporary debate about women with a nearly unedited, at least in the form of a treatise, point of view of a learned woman. Conscious of the operation she was doing, Marinella used the rhetoric typical of the genre, disproving one by one all of Passi's arguments. In a nobiltà, while many exemplary female figures and arguments were used to demonstrate the nobility and excellence of the female sex, the Virgin Mary, as an exemplary woman, is not mentioned at all. However, in 1602, 2 years after the first edition of the Nobiltà, Marinella published her Vita di Maria Vergine, Imperatrice dell'Universo, both in prose and octaves. When reading the letters to the reader, it is immediately clear that this is not a typical devotional work and reflects the transformation of literary topics that was occurring in post-Tridentine years. The actions that are great, magnificent, and divine, and that transcend human operations, require a great and admirable mode of writing. Since all these conditions are to be found in my reasoning, I have chosen this poetic way of writing, which is more admirable and greater than that of prose, using words and ornaments that make reasoning great and marvelous. As I demonstrate elsewhere, in her work, Marinella draws abundantly from Pietro Aretino's Life of the Virgin Mary, first printed in 1539, and on the index of prohibited books at Marinella's time, And she does so not only by taking up full images and sentences, but also for its literary intentions. Marinella's choice, indeed, is certainly not accidental, considering that among the many possible contemporary models for something that had by then become a codified literary genre, like the life of the Virgin, she chooses the most literary and rhetorically ornate one, a narration in which Mary is nonetheless rather active and, in fact, despite the title, human. The Mary proposed by Marinella and by Aretino is an almost literary Mary, certainly superior to ordinary women, human beings, who is never directly presented as an imitable model, but who is in fact represented as a powerful and strong human woman, more similar to that described by Cornazzano than to the post-Tridentine divine one. Within her virtues, her intelligence and ability to teach and to be respected by everyone are often underlined. Mary interprets the Bible and teaches, especially to women, and becomes in fact a possible example for learned, honest, and autonomous women. However, the virgins, first and the high priest, were all overcome by wonder on hearing their interpretation of the obscure meanings of the Holy Scriptures. Similarly, she showed them the way that anyone had to go who wished to please God. She directed, strengthened, and invited the passionate minds of the young girls to heaven. Her discourses benefited their souls in the way that grass scorched by the sun feels when it absorbs rain. And she was therefore able to interpret the Holy Scriptures, becoming an inspiring teacher for other women. In the 1617 edition, which Marinella expands with new episodes absent in Aretino, and in which the focus on female biblical figures is greater, Marinella describes Mary Magdalene and her sister Martha visiting the Virgin, reporting Mary's words and precepts. He nourished the abstinence of their souls, teaching them with gracious and appropriate to angelic creator manners. And she told them in the manner of a gracious sermon, as it is probable. The fact that Marinella feels the need to specify, as it is probable, indicates that the idea that the Virgin was able to pronounce a gracious sermon was her own deduction, but that she believes it to be true. And this is confirmed also in other passages where Marinella, actually following Aretino, underlines the fact that Mary had many followers and disciples. All burning with love of God went often with their disciples, visiting those places where the Immaculate Lamb gave communion to the apostles in the Last Supper. She remained night and day in continuous prayer, meditation, and fasting, teaching with all the feeling of love the way that leads to heaven. She was continually visited, adored, and revered by a group of women and men. Marinella's Mary, like Aretino's, despite the chronological leap, is thus an active and powerful Mary, still saint and exceptional, of course, but far from the silent, secluded woman that certain literature promoted in the same years. Let's move to Arcangela Tarabotti. Arcangela Tarabotti is a now well-known Venetian enforced nun who in her writings waged an open battle against patriarchy. Although she spent her entire existence enclosed in the Benedict convent of Sant'Anna in Castello, Tarabotti was certainly the most direct, lucid, and politically aware woman of her time, perfectly conscious of the injustice suffered by women. Like Marinella and Sara Copio Sullam, she experienced the misogynistic wave of the first half of the 17th century in Venice and corresponded and exchanged polemical writings with many members of the Libertine Accademia degli Incogniti, being, however, less conformist than Marinella, who, despite her proto-feminist attitude and her continuous negotiation with the dominant culture, always remained within the boundaries of what was acceptable to write in specific moments of her long life and in specific literary genres. In her Semplicità Ingannata, printed posthumously in Leiden in 1654 under the pseudonym Galerana Baratotti, and originally entitled The Tirannia Paterna, the Paternal Tyranny, Tarabotti denounces the fathers who forced their daughter to enter convents without a vocation for economic and political reasons. In the third book of the Semplicità, she speaks extensively on the Virgin in order to demonstrate that men have no reason to denigrate women. I think it is worth in this case to listen to her voice to see how powerful and lucid her words were. She addresses to men with statements like this: refrain from extending your ingratitude toward the Virgin Mary. She's speaking ill of her sex and treating it even worse. Not one of you can deny that divine grace entered the world through her. So the fact that Mary, by accepting to save the humanity by giving birth to Christ, is presented as a good reason for men stopping the denigrated woman. And she continues, how can it ever occur to you liars to say that woman means ruin, when it is precisely a woman, supremely excellent in every virtue, who was raised you from the ruin of blindness that you have largely brought upon yourself by contravening God's commands? Here, Tarabotti refers to the typical misogynistic connection between donna, woman, and dan, ruin, mentioning again the Virgin Mary as a proof that it was not true. And she continues, with what temerity dare to call us women timid, O coward? Remember, it was a woman of great valor who wandered through heaven's vastness, assisted only by divine grace, and afraid of penetrating into the abyss. Indeed, she was a brave warrior, armed with heavenly virtues. And also, yet Tarabotti subverts, through the figure of the Virgin, the stereotypical image of timid and fearful woman, unable to fight her battle. And she continues, nearly done, she alone is worth more than all the other saints put together. And through her, our female sex was enriched with more graces and favors than the entire human and angelic natures. And yet Tarabotti seems to claim the superiority of women over men through the Virgin Mary, while men are ungrateful monsters, unable to understand women's valor. Remaining true to his love for ungrateful mankind, our Lord resolved to choose a woman who could be rightly acclaimed the strong woman, to the confusion of all ungrateful monsters, I mean human. Tarabotti, moreover, not only exalts the Virgin Mary as a woman, using her as a powerful tool to defend women from misogynistic attacks, but she also reapproaches men who pray to Mary, but despise other women, and argues that Mary should not listen to their prayers. With how much torment will you see yourself in need of the protection of a woman who, being the type of purity and candidness, should not listen to the filthy prayers of those who in life did not know her, betrayed her son with 1,000 blows of guilt, and always insulted her sex with mortal outrages, which too many, together with despair, cause eternal damnation. Tarabotti words are certainly strong and totally unusual in the context of Marian literature, but reflect well the position of a woman who had a clear idea of the injustice of her world regarding women's roles and possibilities. While La Semplicità Ingannata was a deliberately polemical and clearly uncomfortable text, not by chance it ended up in the index in 1660, the Paradiso Monacale, Convent Paradise, was a work that was more suitable for publication, so that it was the first of Tarabotti's works to be printed. Here Tarabotti praises the monastic life in the case of a free choice based on vocation, but she makes similar points regarding the Virgin Mary. After starting out that for many reasons God prefers women to men, she emphasizes the decisive role of the Virgin in the history of the Church, underlining the fact that she was a woman, and for this she could be associated with other women. Let masculine arrogance be silent, since if those who founded and regulated monastic orders were men, they learned from Mary and no one else the true precepts and rules for religious life. And who will be so bold as to deny this? After the death of her son, she was in a way the first, before St. Peter, to exercise the role of pontiff in the Christian church, because everyone received teaching from her and their superhuman erudition, and learned how to live in accordance with divine will. Therefore, she was the mistress and the teacher of all religious. Tarabotti here goes far beyond praising the Virgin as Queen of Heaven and Empress of the universe, venerable but distant from actual women. She places her the first person, a woman, to hold the office of the pontiff, even before Peter. Such a statement gives a good idea of the Venetian nuns' provocativeness, but also of her conviction and determination to demonstrate women's ability to cover powerful positions and to make decisions for their own. And to make it clear that it is a woman she's talking about, she goes on to claim that Santa Scholastica, sister of Saint Benedict, was superior to him, and that female saints are better than male saints in quality and quantity. These are all signs that she's talking about women's potentialities, even when she speaks on the Virgin, who is admittedly superhuman. By doing this, she seems to recall, with the obvious chronological and cultural differences with her notorious polemical verb, the words and the perspective of Christine de Pisan about the Virgin Mary, which disappeared from the discourse of women for at least 1 century. Even 2. She tries to recognize again in the Virgin a powerful and empowering figure, able to help women to recognize their valor and claim their rights, without certainly surpassing the sphere of decorum and honesty, but gaining authority and legitimation. In conclusion, although described through criteria that refer to the Marian tradition, the figure of the Virgin is used by these writers to appropriate and allow other women to appropriate the power of words, as well as to question the roles attributed to women by the contemporary patriarchal society. While Marinella does so within the limits of the literary genre, remaining for most of her life an acclaimed writer and conforming her literary production to the culture of her time, Tarabotti uses the Virgin in a more political and provocatory way, even in a work such as Convent Paradise, the most ordinary and apparently innocuous of her writings. Certainly, both of them made a great effort to reconsider the figure of the Virgin in Counter Reformation Italy, giving her back her power to defend and dignify women as a woman, a power that was gradually limited in Christian culture and is still underestimated. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Eleonora. I think we can use that mic. That's fine.
Yeah,
it's gonna be
yeah,
easier because
sure.
I guess.
Yeah.
Can you all hear me well?
Okay.
Yes, that's great,
Well,
because we are sort of working with different laptops around the same table, but we're trying to get only one mic open so as to avoid echoes. Thank you, Ida and Eleonora, for these 2 fascinating presentations. I think there's so much to unpack here and to discuss. I mean, we do have 15 minutes or so for discussion. So I just would like to sort of express my gratitude for highlighting some important features of these textual traditions. In particular, it seems to me that you have been showing how there's a fantastic combination here of literary sources which are a filter through which to read the real experience of people, and this is a sort of huge amount of literary works which can be used by readers from the time, from the 16th and 17th century, but also by us, to try to get a better sense of what both the readers and writers were thinking about when dealing with these topics. I think you're sort of also moving one big step ahead when thinking about combining the scholarly tradition very well embodied by the works of Virginia Cox, and on the other hand, the tradition of studies in the history of emotions, particularly in the case of Ida's own presentation. And more broadly, I think a very provocative idea which come out to my mind in this double bill tonight is really that of taking more literally what we find in the text, because those sources are the only traces left which we have to get a better sense of what these people thought. So trying to explore these texts for what they really tell us, I think it's is the most productive way to really find our way into the minds of these people, because we keep talking a lot about literary commonplaces and tropes, and of course even devotional literature is really filled with tropes and commonplaces, but if we try to take these commonplaces seriously, be they about romantic love or devotional experiences, everything seems to acquire a deeper sense. And these textual sources, which sound and look so far from us, do begin to gain some sort of three-dimensional status, which I think is extremely productive. So these are just, some very broad general thoughts about the stimuli which you have given us. Of course, the other important point is what both your researches are doing in terms of allowing us to get a better understanding of notions of femininity, both secular and spiritual, if not properly religious, in this particular time period. You also confirm very well what Virginia Cox has been arguing for a while now, that is the fact that this Counter Reformation literary production is indeed much more interesting and much broader than it has been said, and the way in which it has been described for decades, right? I mean, I think we all were trained in a tradition where there was this sort of snobbish way of dealing with Counter-Reformation literature, and yet your works do show that there is really much going on between the last few decades of the 16th century and the early 17th century. So without further ado, we might want to open it to discussion. I'm sure you would be happy to take questions from our audience or comments or remarks. The field is really open to everybody. So please just raise your hand if you wish. I think you can maybe take the share screening off so that
no, Eugenio is the administrator.
No, you are
but for stopping
from here.
Interrompi condivisione.
Yes, so that we have that's great. Okay. So that we have all the faces of our friends online. So if you want to ask a question, please do raise a hand or just pop in.
Maybe if I can just add something, a brief comment to what you just mentioned. The point you made, take more literally what we find in the texts, is what I'm finding really interesting and fascinating in these journeys I am doing in these texts, because what I'm finding is that it's true, literature was used as lenses to see things, to shape lives. It was taken seriously. The topoi, they were what we refer to as topoi, they were taken seriously. Like also the love miracles, like that when two people are in love, the heart migrates from one person to another. They were taken seriously, not in the sense, of course, that they believed that the heart really moved, but they were taken as a way of understanding what was happening to them. And this took some courage for me, because coming from a traditional education and scholarly tradition, I have in mind this golden rule of Dionisotti, that the reasons of literature should be found only in literature. And so it takes some courage to try to mix literature and life, but I think that it's worth it. And Eugenio found just the right words to define this.
Right. I mean, Eleonora, if you wish to add something while we wait for possibly questions or comments, No,
yes, I think that the connection between literature and life. I mean, life also has readers, because I mean, these literary texts were read. I mean, these figures were considered very lively. I mean, the Virgin Mary, for instance, was presented, and like many other exemplary women, or like, for instance, I mean, I liked very much the fact that these two exchange of letters in which they decide which literary model they were using, like Fiammetta or De Ruyter or other figures. So I think it's it is true that they take them part of their lives. So in some way, it's interesting to understand how these books were read. I mean, of course, we only have this, the books, so we don't know what they were actually thinking, but we can guess, because I mean, they also wrote a book after that, especially women, because many women start to write after reading. And I think it's very interesting the way which they interpret, they transform from their point of view, even kind of acclaimed ideas and figures. So yes, without taking anything to literature, I mean, we still believe that literature is literature, and there are some forms and genres, and they were taken seriously as well. But I think it's a mixture. I mean, you can just ignore it, the fact that there were people who were reading these books.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's just probably too late.
Yeah.
For all of us. Yeah.
Yes, there is one question. Yes.
Can I? Yeah. Okay. First,
I think we don't hear you.
okay.
Or
No, I think it's open here, maybe not. Come funziona qui?
1 second.
Okay.
Try now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, it was silent.
Hi. I first of all want to thank you both for really interesting thoughts and work. I wanted, I don't know if it's a coincidence or on purpose, but actually today is Purim, the Jewish holiday of Book of all days. It is tonight. Wow. It was a great way for me to celebrate the holiday. I wanted to refer to this and say that in recent years in Jewish or Israeli feminism, the Book of Esther is becoming more and more referred to as the difference between Esther's character and Vashti, and the way that they represent two different types of femininity or types of being a woman, and that it is very much it's a common example when we talk about the Madonna whore complex in culture, and the way that women are perceived as either or, and this dichotomy between being sexual or being this very pure and innocent woman. And that it was very interesting to me to hear this as an academic work and a research, and that it's very present now in the discourse in Israel, but in general in Jewish women. And I also wanted, I don't know if it's maybe it's a bit much to ask, but I would like if you can elaborate a bit more about the dichotomy between lust and love, and how it's present in the works you are researching. I know that after the Counter Reformation Tridentine decisions, marriage was perceived differently, but I was wondering specifically about the lust-love dichotomy, if you can say a bit about that, a bit more than what you said. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you for this comment. I didn't know that today was Purim, so it's a really nice coincidence. I'm very happy about this. And also, thank you for telling me about this interest about these two models of womanhood in Jewish culture. Yeah, this is very interesting. I mean, I studied this only from a literary point of view, and I don't know much about how these two characters can work in contemporary discourse about women and womanhood. So I would be very curious to learn more about this. So maybe I will contact you afterwards and go on in the discussion. About your question, you asked about the dichotomy between lust and love. I talked about this especially regarding my second case study, Miriam Bernardino, because in the first case study, Sarah is not really concerned by this. She's the tension between the two lovers is about religion and about the kind of fame and immortality Sarah wants to achieve. In the lecture, I mentioned that Ansaldo uses Sarah's identification with Esther to manipulate her, but he also uses her desire to become famous, to acquire fame for her name and for her father. He tells her that earthly immortality through poetry shouldn't be an objective, a goal, a life goal for her at all. He tries to tell her that this is sinful and that the only immortality she should aspire to is the one in the afterlife. So this is the point of tension, the main point of tension between the two lovers. And my impression is that Sarah is not sexophobic at all, while Emilia is. So if I can, well, I don't want to kind of read too much or psychologically interpret what she says, but my impression is that she internalized the sexuophoby of Catholicism very much, and starting from this, she built a whole interpretation, a whole fantasy and narrative of what love should or shouldn't be. And one day I will publish the critical edition and hopefully also an English translation of her letters. She has very interesting formulation about this. Like she blames Bernardino for behaving like an animal. She's very harsh, and she's very scared by all this physical dimension. And you used just the right word, dichotomy. For her, all that is physical, bodily is sinful, something that belongs to the animal dimension, and the only thing that the base of true love is completely spiritualized. And this is you remember the cover of Barbara Rosenwein's book, Love, A History in 5 Fantasies, that I showed at the beginning. It shows a woman with 2 pink glasses, with a pink glass, with pink glasses, and this means, bye Greta, thank you for being here, bye bye. And this means that the fantasy of love, the narrative of love, is the lenses through which people see reality and interpret reality. And so I think that in this case, in Emilia's case, this is very strong, a very strong and exclusive lenses through which she looks at reality and interprets it. I hope this answered a little bit.
Good night. I have a couple of questions. And well, sorry, we should. Okay. I much enjoyed the whole panel. I had a question for Eleonora. I wanted to know if any of the Catholic sources, while they change and refashion the image of the Holy Virgin, shows any awareness that those images are being systematically destroyed in the Protestant countries. That is, those images of a grieving woman are precisely the target of, hammers and whatnot. I think the answer is no, but I just wanted to ask if there is any awareness. And about Ida, again, about things that the texts are not telling us, I wanted to mention that in this age, typically women are excluded from classical culture. They're not included. So it's kind of ironic that Sarah and her whole discourse about marriage apparently did never encounter the classical text that would be a perfect fit for her. The story of Amor and Psyche in Apuleius' Metamorphosis, where Psyche is married simultaneously to a beast and to the god of higher love. But again, I think the answer is no, right?
Yeah, you go first.
Yes, well, to be honest, I didn't find anything, so I don't know. But yes, probably you are right that the answer is no. And I'm curious also about, actually, I would like to know more about what happens, if happens something in Protestant country, actually, in terms of writings. I'm working on Italy now, but and on more Catholic perspective. But I would like to enlarge and make a larger comparison. I think it would be very interesting.
I recommend the book by James Simpson, Under the Hammer, where he argues that the destruction of images is very important if we want to understand American Puritanism and the whole history of religion.
Can you repeat the title, please?
And Sotto il martello, Under the Hammer. It's a very explicit title.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. I mean, I live in England, and there are so many in cathedrals.
So many things you do not see.
Right. But yeah, exactly. I mean, I saw the destroy, but
like the windows.
It's definitely an interesting point.
So thank you for being here, Alessandro. I think that in Emilia's, for Sarah is a little bit difficult because what happened when Ansaldo decided to publish their correspondence, he removed completely Sarah's letters, and he, instead of her letters, instead of her texts, he published a list of a summary of her letters and a list of points she made in her letter. So we have we have many layers to overcome, to try to reach Sarah's voice. But indeed, it's I think she had some classical education. She was I don't know if she had a classical, she had a first-hand knowledge of classical literature, but a second-hand knowledge, I'm sure that she had. For instance, in these points, one thing that survives is that she uses Plato as a source and as a model, which of course Ansaldo doesn't agree with, because in his opinion she should only use religious models and not pagan ones. As for Emilia, I think that she has a second-hand knowledge of classical literature, because she mentioned the Heroides, she mentioned these anecdotes about Alexander the Great, but this is all literature that could be found in vernacular. It had been translated, and it was mainstream. So I think that she accessed classical literature through translation.
Thanks.
Yes, compendium quotations and things, because there were so many books with these episodes were mentioned and were kind of common knowledge.
Exactly. But I didn't find any reference to Amoris in Emilia.
Thanks.
Right. I mean, I think we are kind of running out of time. So I would like to thank once again Eleonora and Ida for sharing their wisdom and these super interesting materials. And that's been really a great combination of perspectives. And I would like to thank everybody in the call for joining us. It's been a pleasure to see you all, and I hope that we will have more opportunities to get together in person, hopefully next time. But thanks very much for being with us. And I'm sure that if you wish to be in touch with Eleonora and Ida with further questions or remarks on their presentations, they will be happy to receive emails. So, and you can easily find their contacts on the websites of both universities. Okay. Well, thank you again, everybody. Thanks, Ida, and thanks, Eleonora.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.